7th Avenue, New York, the garment district, the heart of one of America's oldest industries. It's fall in New York City, which means it's time to think about clothes for spring. It's all part of the fashion cycle, 7th Avenue's perpetual motion machine. From couture to Kmart, America spends $148 billion a year. There's a lot of money to be made on the basic necessities, and so clothing is big business. In fact, it's many businesses, big and small, woven together all over the world. I'm Robert Reich. Tonight on Made in America, we examine what American competitiveness really means in a world in which more and more industries are becoming global, where people work together across borders to produce products that are international creations. This fundamental transformation is affecting all of us. Some are doing better and better. Others are getting left behind. We may even be bringing up the first generation of Americans who are not as well off as their parents. Who's making it in America and who's not, as the rules of the economic game change? For an answer, we go behind the scenes of the international rag trade. We follow the making of this dress and one complete fashion cycle. We weave a story of many threads, beginning here. 550 7th Avenue, the most high-profile address in the garment district. Across the street is a bronze sculpture of a sewer, reminiscent of a time when America made most of its clothes within its own borders. But now in buildings like this, it seems that more deals get made than garments. Many involve the biggest names in the business.
This is supposed to come from, all of this is supposed to come over here.
Meet Bill Blass, one of America's most famous fashion designers.
Pin that in there. Cut a piece of this. No, cut a piece of this so I can take this through here. Understand?
Okay, so I cut...
Blass is creating a gown for his collection.
Smaller.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is, look at this in the front here, Shami. This isn't anything. This is just a piece of nothing. It has to
no,
be.
I have to cut.
Okay? And that solves this problem.
Blass must put the finishing touches on this and 80 other pieces in the next 2 weeks to show his well-to-do clientele.
When you come, we'll try this. Most of my customers certainly don't need clothes, but they do have to be seduced into buying them. And it has to be that they have enormous appeal. For instance, the suit coming in here now, this is the sort of suit that, for my customer, is a good investment suit. This is the way. Now, this is classic, and this is sort of typical Bill Blass. No matter what anybody else shows or does, this is the sort of way I like to see a gal look.
Bold colors, classic shapes, the signature look for Bill Blass originals. The price? From $3,700 for this suit
For the woman who wants something a little bit more snappy, more eye appeal.
to $9,000 for some evening gowns.
See that?
These price tags may shock, but Bill Blass's customers have never had it better. Many are among America's richest 1%. Families making more than $550,000 a year.
White suit takes you to dinner, takes you any place. While it looks good at the races or at Ascot or something like that.
Still, selling expensive clothes to wealthy customers isn't what makes a designer really rich. It's a very small market. In the high fashion business, you cash in on your fame by selling your name. One company that has bought the prestigious Bill Blass name is the Hero Group.
Well, that's Bill's whole new thing with the movement from the...
Hero, which makes less expensive designer label clothes, owns the Bill Blass license for sportswear and dresses.
Coming from
Loose sort of tent
Had a
over it.
scarf or something.
Yeah,
in the
I don't even hate
Georgette
the
or
print,
something.
incidentally, so
No, it's not bad at all.
black and white is
You do.
Okay.
Today, Hero's Blass Division President, Gerald Buxbaum, and dress designer Suli Bonelli meet with Blass to select fabrics for holiday and resort, the two fashion seasons between fall and spring.
Well, you think it's too heavy, Bill? Maybe if we didn't fuse it or something, it might be okay.
I think it's an awfully heavy crate for dresses.
Okay.
This is the first step in creating a new collection.
And then there are things like this and
Hate it.
new
I don't like it.
dies.
Don't even like the check. It's too modest.
Very
too-
pedestrian.
It's timid. Timid, it has no guts.
Okay,
I hate that.
okay. And
The Hero Group says Blass personally okays everything in the lines. Well, almost everything.
On the daytime, we talk about wool crepe.
You can sell wool crepe. It ain't the youngest fabric.
But if we do it like you're doing those color block dresses in an interesting way.
But why do it in wool crepe, which is already an old fabric? Why don't you just do it in a...
How about if we combine it, you know, like with the silk scarves or something like that?
Sounds old to me. It doesn't have the snap and appeal for a young woman. The connotation isn't young.
Okay.
And that's what we're about, to make the youngest possible clothes. In this category of dresses, I'd be very leery of wool crepe. Even for daytime, you can come up with all kinds of other daytime fabrics that are acceptable, but not that.
Okay. So
Well, that took care of that subject.
yeah.
Well, not quite.
Love this.
Designer Sully Benelli still thinks the wool crepe will sell. He sketches a dress for the fabric. Why is he betting on a fabric Bill Blass discarded?
I think this dress, because the way it is, it's just a simple shape that shows the body a little bit, and it has something to it without being too outrageous, and I think that makes it very rich looking. I think this particular dress, it could be one of the #1 dresses on the line.
Well, now, when do we have the additional sketches in here?
When the sketches are shown to Blass, he thinks the line is too dull.
We know this sort of thing is successful. I don't want to see any more of it. Let's see something that gives the consumer, when she comes in, hey, this is new from Bill Blass dress. Come on.
Okay.
But we're not
did you
getting
see?
it.
Blass wants a more festive approach. Does it help to add a silk scarf to our wool crepe dress?
That's awfully quiet for this resort. That's the only one I like. That's the one I feel is...
Blass doesn't even like the scarf. Again, he pushes for jazzier ideas.
That is a sarong, for God's sake.
Sarong skirt and a
bathing
knit top.
suit
Yeah,
top.
bathing suit top.
Low in front, low in back,
The
tight.
cotton lycra.
Yeah. You don't have anything like that in this, and that's what's so necessary.
Yeah.
Even though Blass has different ideas, Hero keeps the wool dress in the line. With the design done, it goes not to a sewer in the room next door, as it might have in the past, but to a production manager who sends it halfway around the world. The message arrives at Hero's Hong Kong branch. Hero Hong Kong is a manufacturing bridge. It takes designs from New York and materials from all over the world. Then it sends them to be cut and sewn in the People's Republic of China, where labor is even cheaper than in Hong Kong. Today, the blue wool crepe arrives for inspection. It's all part of a global assembly line. For our blue crepe dress, that assembly line begins in Australia, the world's leading producer of wool. Raw Australian wool is shipped to Japan, where textile mills turn it into fabric. A Japanese company markets the wool crepe, sending samples to the United States. The crepe catches the eye of designer Sully Benelli, who sketches our dress. And Hero buys the Bill Blass name to put on the label. Meanwhile, artists in New York, silkworms in China, and printers in Korea combine forces to make the scarf. And in Hong Kong, the Hero office receives word to take it all from there. In the fitting room in Hong Kong, a tailor nips and tucks a muslin pattern for our wool dress.
No, I think you tell us how you feel about the chest and
The armhole is very low.
It will be months before this Bill Blass dress is ready for market. The time between order and delivery can be as much as 12 months when U.S. companies manufacture offshore. But how did we get so far from home? How did an American dress by an American designer end up here in Hong Kong? It's a common story these days. Increasingly, what you do, what I do, is combined with what people in other countries do to make the things that you and I buy. Take this example. I wrote my latest book at a word processor in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with software created in California and hardware manufactured in Taiwan. The book's cover was designed in New York on a computer from Japan. Ink from Korea, paper from Canada, a printing press from Germany were combined in a plant in New Jersey to produce pages that then went to Mexico to be bound into the finished book. If you bought the book, it cost you $24. Everyone on that global assembly line got part of your $24. There was even about 35 cents left over for me. That's becoming the real issue, not whether it's an American product, a Japanese product, a German product, but what jobs Americans do to help produce it. It's the same with cars, computers, aircraft, and clothing. Companies of many nations now produce international composites. That's a radical change from the past. In the early 1900s, most Americans wore clothes that were not only designed in the United States, but also cut and sewn here. New York City was the nation's clothes-making capital, in part because of the tide of immigrants that had been flowing into the city since the late 1800s. Immigrants provided the labor force, and the garment industry gave them a shot at making it in a new land. But conditions were far from ideal, so workers fought for better treatment and higher pay. By the 1930s, wages in New York were rising and immigration subsiding. So companies took to the road, leaving the city in search of cheaper labor. They found it first elsewhere in the north, then in the American South. But the trek wouldn't stop here, for a pool of even cheaper labor was emerging halfway around the world. After World War II, thousands of immigrants fleeing revolution in China descended upon the British colony of Hong Kong.
Anguish and heartbreak are daily companions in teeming Hong Kong, as authorities are called upon to cope with a sharp increase in the number of refugees from communist China. The government of this
With its population doubled, Hong Kong needed new sources of jobs. Textiles and clothing factories proved to be the answer. They could be started with little money and equipment, and there was a workforce ready to do almost any job at any pay. At first, factories here, as well as in Japan, made only cotton fabric and cheap apparel. But this was enough to set off a battle in a war as old as international commerce itself. Here's 50 years of debate compressed to about a minute. Buckle your seatbelts.
It's a tug of war between protectionism and free trade. On one side are countries that can make clothes cheaply. They want the freedom to sell them to us. Call that free trade. On the other side are U.S. clothes makers who want protection from cheap imports. Call that protectionism. In the middle, Uncle Sam. He wants to help out other countries but not lose jobs for his own people. Old debate. Back in the 40s, we blamed protectionism for everything from the Great Depression to World War II. And anyway, free trade seemed a good way to keep other nations out of the clutches of communism. So we made trade easier by reducing tariffs. Just a fancy word for taxes on imports. But imports scared U.S. fabric and clothing makers, especially when cheap cotton started flowing in from Hong Kong and Japan. These imports would become a tide, a wave, a flood, they feared, and U.S. workers would drown. Enter John F. Kennedy. Campaigning for president, he said he'd help. But once in office, it got complicated. For every industry wanting protection, another squawked for free trade.
I get periodic meetings from chicken growers who are anxious for us to provide a free flow of chickens into Western Europe.
We wanted chickens flowing out, but not cotton T-shirts flowing in. The compromise? Quotas. They allow imports, but limit their number. But wait, what's Hong Kong to do? If it can't send as many clothes as it wants, it gets less money. Ta-da! Send better stuff and charge more. T-shirts out, designer blouses in. Hong Kong goes from rags to riches, from Kmart to Bloomingdale's.
Today, Hong Kong is a jewel in the crown of the international clothing business. Some U.S. companies, like Hero, set up their own offices here to oversee production. For other companies who want to import but don't yet know the global scene, there's someone to turn to. Lenny Heller, the Marco Polo of the rag trade. Connections are his business.
As a young man, I had started to work in the jewelry industry with my dad and my uncle. And I loved it. It was a glamorous life. I was single. It wasn't so much fun when I got into Charlottesville, Virginia, and I had to put the valuable gems and jewels under the bed and push the bed up against the door and stay in the motel all night without dinner. But when I got into California, I would go into the Statler Hilton on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. They had a big vault, put the jewels away in the vault, and I would go out and I would have a wonderful nightlife, even dating some starlets.
Can she check the consumption?
Eventually, Heller traded his jewelry for clothing.
this skirt.
Now he runs a company called Connectus.
Goods. Ask her in Cantonese. No, we're going to have dim sum.
Connectus connects American clothing companies with factories all over the world.
We're just going to do one factory this way.
Heller is an international middleman on the global assembly line.
Who loves this piece? Who hates this piece? I don't know. When I first saw this, Patrick Norris, the designer in California, was working on this piece. And I said, Patrick, I think you're crazy. I think it's the ugliest thing I ever saw in my life. And it's become one of the strongest pieces. So it goes to show you how you ought to stay out of design and not voice my opinion. But I do have a problem on how we're going to get this kind of fabric. Patrick actually used old antique.
Heller looks for factories that offer the best work at the best price. He also looks for the least hassle with U.S. quotas.
And we're in the wool jacket category. Any quota problems today?
I checked last week, the quota cost is almost 700 Hong Kong per dozen.
But we're going to lose about 2.5, 3 weeks.
Quotas raise prices on clothes by limiting the supply. As a result, Americans pay at least $3,650 million more each year for clothes than we would if there were no restrictions. Some argue that the tab is much, much higher.
Hong Kong, a dozen. What does that convert to in U.S. dollars? 700 Hong Kong. You got the...
about
that's close to
$8 a piece.
$8 a piece, just for the privilege of quota.
Yes.
It's crazy. I think the quota system is a very, very ill-conceived plan. We are spending a fortune in unnecessary quota costs that go into the cost of each and every garment you wear and that the rest of consumer America wears. Unnecessary. It hasn't created any more jobs in the apparel industry for labor. It hasn't brought the apparel industry back to the United States. Despite the quota scheme that has been going on now for some 20 years or so, businesses and apparel production centers in the United States are still suffering and still hurting.
Maspeth, Queens, New York. Across the street is a factory that has stood here since 1954.
I mean, my father started this business 42 years ago. I always wanted to be able to say my sons and my brother's sons could come into the business, but I don't see that as a viable option anymore.
This is a sweater factory, and this is Richard Goldman, one of two brothers who run the place.
A couple of years ago, we had about 60, 70, maybe 80 people working. They were working as many hours as they wanted to work, whatever they wanted. From 7 in the morning till 5, 6 at night, till 12 o'clock on Saturdays. We used to have people in the back on the knitting department running on Sundays. We used to knit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The phones would be ringing off. It was fun. It really was. It was really exciting. I mean, it was just activity. Everything was really, you just juiced and pumped. It was great.
But times have changed. Goldman has had to lay off workers. He's not alone. 400,000 apparel jobs have been lost in the United States since 1973.
Guy's never in.
Now, retailers are in trouble, and the recession is not letting up, making it difficult for Goldman even to collect old debts.
Probably knows it's me and won't pick up the phone.
Goldman also worries about imports. Half the clothes Americans buy are now made in other countries. How can this be with quotas meant to protect U.S. factories? Goldman says importers easily get around them.
We made a treaty, the MFA, the multi-fiber agreement, was made years ago, and we were totally protected in cotton. We own the cotton market. The American manufacturers own the cotton market. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Orient came out with this fiber called Ramey cotton. Now, I have looked everywhere. I don't know what Ramey is. I have no idea what Ramey is. I've been in this business for 22 years. I don't know what Ramey is. But Ramey cotton comes in quota-free. What a great idea. I wish I could be that brilliant.
Goldman says there are other government policies that work against him, even military policy.
It's funny because when the war was going on in the Gulf, and we had the television on and everybody was interested in it and watching it, find out that Turkey, our traditional ally, has got a $1 billion textile trade credit. I believe that that's exactly the way it was worded. And the reason why they got it is because they allowed our planes, American planes, to fly from American bases. That would have to protect Turkey in the first place at our cost, to fly into Iraq. I'm willing to volunteer my roof for Apache helicopters to get a small portion of that for my own textile trade. You? Come on, you didn't call me at home last night. You know what's going on here. We're going to have a war soon. All right, I'm going to hire Schwarzkopf, and he's going to work over here. You won't say no to him.
Goldman says the government isn't looking out for him.
He must know it's me.
But do other nations protect their clothing industries any better than we do?
Kidding.
I think we're pretty much like most of the advanced industrial nations. Germany had a period from the 1960s through the early part of the 1970s when they really decided to let both their fabric and their clothing industries go, and there was a huge decline. But most of the advanced industrial countries have done very much what we have, which is erect protection in some form or another that is leaky.
Now the U.S. administration proposes to allow more and more imports, ultimately doing away with clothing quotas altogether. In the face of all of this, Goldman tries to stay afloat.
I see this as survival, trying to figure out ways to survive. Just to cut whatever corners possible, to get a product out that's saleable, and just stay in business. There's no more, it's not even a profit motive anymore, it's a break-even motive. It's like the American dream turned into the American nightmare.
Why do we have to move?
Because your father lost his job.
Was he fired?
No, they closed the plant.
Why?
A lot of people are buying clothes made in other countries, not ours.
Nearly 500,000 Americans who make apparel and home fashions have lost their jobs, even though what they make is second to none. Buy American, and Americans work.
Why are they buying that other stuff?
I don't know, honey. I don't know.
While it's true foreign competition may hurt some American workers, it also gives other Americans an opportunity to thrive.
Me before, I never met you before. Okay. And I'm Lenny Heller, and I'm from the States. Although I've been in
Lenny
Hong Kong
Heller
for a
checks
lot.
out a sweater factory for his Connectus network.
I've been coming to Hong Kong for many years, working in the double knit era and the sweater knits. So what is your total finished sweater capacity per month? How many?
2,500 dozens, something.
Besides running Connectus, Heller is launching his own line of clothes based on a former television show.
Did you ever hear about 30-something? Do you know this word? It's a famous American TV program.
Really?
Really. Yeah. And
Sweaters will be an important part of the 30-something line.
It's very delicate. This is very beautiful. This is very good. Yeah.
Heller says he can't get labor-intensive work like this done at a competitive price in America, where the average clothing worker makes 3 times the average pay here in Hong Kong.
We would just pay the hand embroidery job, keep about the same, just a little bit more, but only just for the American sizes against the
It's time to quit protecting U.S. factories from imports, Heller says, and let free market competition decide who best can make what.
We have to trade. The world has to trade. And the world has to support industries of other countries. We have to look at ourselves as a nation and say, where are we going? Are we going to be a high-tech nation, or are we going to be what is considered a low-level production facility? American mothers don't want their daughters to be in sewing plants. American mothers would love their daughters to be secretaries, doctors, nurses, technicians, not girls sitting behind a sewing machine for 8 or 10 hours a day. Other countries need this kind of industry for their survival. Let us give them that.
But back in Queens, New York, Goldman says he's surrounded by plenty of people who need the clothing industry for their survival.
Let's get started with that. Just give me a quick wait on it.
Like many other apparel shops, Ricky Knitting Mills employs immigrants, many of whom don't speak English. Goldman thinks the U.S. government overlooks the role small factories like his play in providing jobs for many who might otherwise be unemployed.
I'd really like to see a cabinet, almost a cabinet post, small business cabinet post. So people like myself, and people, smaller businesses, have somebody to go and say, hey, you don't know what's going on. You just have no concept of people coming to me crying because I have to lay them off, and they're supporting families, and they have rent to pay, and they literally are crying that they need a job, and I feel bad, but there's nothing I can do.
We think of ourselves as such an advanced country, but you know, not everybody in this country is highly skilled or highly educated. We have, in effect, a third world country inside our first world country, and we need jobs for those people. People who are immigrants to places like Los Angeles, to New York. Their first job, the first step up the ladder of economic opportunity in America, is a job in the clothing industry.
I've been in women's wear 10 years. And
Goldman meets a potential client, Kevin Quinn.
I worked in dresses. I worked in private label for about 5 years.
Yeah, where?
And in Chicago.
Quinn is a buyer for Stunt Gear, a new LA-based line of children's clothing.
Don't know them.
Dad, nobody does.
He met Goldman at a children's fashion fair.
You saw the sweaters that we did there, correct? We didn't sell any.
Not a one. Well, remember, you've never been to a show before.
No.
It's very rare that you will actually sell at the show.
Goldman gives Quinn a tour.
The flow of goods really moves in this direction. So really to get a feel for the plant, we'll walk through it and I'll show you how everything moves. Our industry, but you can go from this kind of jacquard look to, I mean, you want to see cutesy, here's like little puffy, three-dimensional acrylic. You don't want to do acrylics though, I'm sure.
No, acrylics are...
Okay. Produce sweaters. You can either produce a sweater made 100% on a flat.
Goldman puts on a good show, but he's also taking the opportunity to look Quinn over. Goldman has gambled with new clients before and lost.
I'm not going to tell you what company, but a very large retailer came to us about a year and a half ago to make some samples. We were absolutely thrilled. I mean, we stopped everything. We turned on a dime, made them the garments that they wanted, priced them competitively, FedExed them out. They got the garments the next day. I got a call back. They thanked us. Everything looked great. Never paid for the samples. Never returned my phone calls after that. I went to the store. There was a store not far from where I live. I walked in, and there was my sweater with a made overseas label. And I was just fit to be tied. That company's no longer, not that they would come back here, but they're not allowed even if they wanted to. The Navy's done. Yeah. So after this bundle is done, it's all done, then we got to make collars.
Goldman knows he must play every angle correctly to survive. Now he worries about trade negotiations with Mexico.
How do you think I feel when my family, we're all sitting and watching television, and here's the head trade representative from the United States is telling my kids that they want to put me out of business because they'd rather give it to Mexico. How do I answer my 12-year-old when he says, why do they want to do that, Dad? We're Americans. I have no answer.
Goldman's worry is a proposed free trade agreement with Mexico, which would eliminate almost all trade barriers between the United States and its southern neighbor.
We want to work together toward the free and open trade so vital to creating jobs and enterprise in your economy and our own.
I don't know. If Mexico comes, I can't compete with Mexico. I can't compete with 94 cents a day. It'd be interesting to see how we would do on an even keel, but I can't blame the consumer for buying a sweater for $10 made in Mexico that I have to make for $15 or $18. I can't blame them.
Here's a quiz. Name the American president who said, when we buy manufactured goods from abroad, we get the goods and the foreigner gets the money. When we buy the manufactured goods at home, we get the goods and the money. It was Abraham Lincoln. Protectionism has had a long history in America, but it's a tactic that can create more problems than it solves. Honest Abe's arithmetic doesn't include the higher prices that have to be paid when foreign goods are blocked. Also, protectionism